even for a 1 gram of marijuana, right? Even for the smallest little case, it has $1,000 worth of court costs.
Wow.
Because it's characterized as a drug and alcohol offense.
Welcome to the Nashville Current Podcast. I am your host, Ed Clay, and today we have Joe Fuson, partner in Freeman and Fuson Law Group and the Hemp Law Group. Joe, how you doing today?
Doing great, Ed. How you doing?
Doing really good. You know, you do a lot of criminal defense, and I was just reading an article from last week that the murder rate has doubled in the last 2 months compared to the same time period last year. What's overall crime looking like right now, and why do you think that the murder rate doubled?
Yeah, I didn't know that. Living in Nashville's seen quite a boom in the last 5 to 7 years. We've seen a big population increase. We've seen a lot of people move from other states here to Tennessee. So we saw in Nashville area specifically saw a pretty big increase in crime rates just because of the increased population. But what caused this increase? I don't know. I mean, if you look back, I guess if you're talking about from May a year ago versus or from this time a year ago.
January 1st till last week this year, and then January 1st till last week, the previous year.
I don't know.
12 to 24, I think it was.
I think people I think a lot of people have, whether it's because of financial issues, whether it's because of the pandemic, I think people are kind of getting to their wits' end. I think people are starting to unravel a little bit. And maybe you see that happening. It could be other things. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, the level of mental illness, I think, is underreported. I mean, if you figure 20 to 25% suffer from mental illness that we know of, and then you add a pandemic, I don't know many people in the last 12 months that haven't experienced some form of, whether you call it depression or extra anxiety or what. I think pretty much everybody has experienced something, and that has to have some type of effect.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because you look at drugs and alcohol use, mental illness being, I think, the primary factor when it comes to criminal activity. You've seen an increase in that. And also you've seen a decrease in support systems. So people who do have underlying mental illness, who have other issues, drug and alcohol treatment, they've not been able to be in their support groups. They've not been able to go get the treatment they need due to the inability of doctors' offices to meet patients in person. You may have counselors and people that were previously providing services that are no longer capable of doing that like they were. So you may have seen some of that deteriorating. That could have a big cause of it. Be a big cause of that.
Do the judges take that into consideration when someone's suffering from mental illness? Do they take that into consideration as to the sentencing, especially with the pandemic? Somebody's sitting in there, they were clean for, let's say, 5 years. They're told now to stay at home. You can't go to your AA meetings. You can't go to your NA meetings. They just kind of, break. Is that taken into consideration?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in general, mental illness is taken into consideration. We have things like mental health court that they identify people who are in the criminal system because of mental illness, and they put them in a separate court system, a separate docket that involves more treatment and therapy and kind of more rehabilitation to deal with mental illness. They have some services and ways they can deal with that separately and apart. But yeah, I mean, as far as now, currently, we're seeing a lot of the things that you just discussed, like having a DA or district attorney and a judge also kind of both in agreement that somebody shouldn't be sitting in jail right now if they've got an underlying addiction, and we can, for example, get them into a treatment facility, or people that have violated their probation because they've failed a drug test because they couldn't get the support they were relying on for so long, whether it be AA meetings or counselors or drug treatment, inpatient treatment. I'm having a hard time getting people actually into inpatient treatment because of the limited ability for them to transport them, the limited ability for people to provide staffing, just a lot of the pieces. And so, yeah, I think they're taken into consideration. I think also the judges, when it comes to bonds, are taking that into consideration when they're setting the initial bond, which is a lot of the reason, big reason why a lot of people are sitting in jails, because they can't post a bond.
Yeah, it was one of those things as this whole thing was going down with COVID. There wasn't a lot of talk about the effects that it was going to have on addicts. There wasn't a lot of talk on the effects that it was going to have on mental illness. And it was almost like, I don't know, it seemed like it was forgotten almost. Like, oh, you know what? Those people don't matter. But whenever it's always interesting, whenever they say those people don't matter, well, that's That's our family. That's our friends. That's, our loved ones. And it was just kind of like what seemed like a big oversight and a lack of, just something just done off of a fear of one thing, not thinking about all the other dominoes that could fall.
Yeah, I agree. It's almost like they didn't recognize that those were going to fall, or they did recognize it and they didn't address it. I mean, you see this now with some of the ability for people to now get, they've lost their job, they need help, so now they're in a double bad situation. They don't have the money to go get the help, and the pandemic is a big part of that. So yeah, I mean, when you look at paying somebody $600 a month as a stipend or providing PPP funds, I didn't hear of any funds being offered to people to get back into therapy and treatment to help with their mental illness. It's been exacerbated because of the pandemic, because of COVID. I mean, people, whether my wife was even talking about it, it's maybe not something that's in your face, but it seems like it's kind of bubbling underneath the skin with this going on, right? Everybody's kind of feeling it inside. And I think that wells up in people who have underlying issues, or have prior anxiety or depression or things like that are there or present. Suicidal tendencies.
Sure. Yeah. I know from a company standpoint, I mean, we had to lay off about 120 people at one point this last year. Still have, about 100, I've still got about 150 employees. And you see just company-wide, like being at the top and having these meetings, you see the effects on everybody. And, everyone from the executives to, the doctors, nurses, cleaners, everybody is experiencing, something, and, getting people back motivated and focused and seeing a vision like, oh, there is a future, there is tomorrow. We don't get that. Like, I think it's being, misunderstood. I don't think that we're really diving into what that means for society, and the fact that, when this pandemic's over, we still got to get everybody back to work. And to do that, we're going to have to focus on mental illness and acknowledge that there's a lot of problems. And I can only imagine how bad it is for those that are more likely to go to jail, that might be in lower economic demographics. And I think that we can't forget that. And for what you do, I'm sure you're kind of seeing that firsthand on that end.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you got to figure, just the average DUI case, for example, they've got to pay probation costs if they plead guilty and go on probation. Probation costs, they got to pay for alcohol safety class. They've got to have monitoring done for their vehicle. They've got to report whether it's in person or through Zoom. Probation offices have been pretty good about that part of it. And they've got to pay fines sometimes. They've got to pay for community service hours or pay to take off work to go to community service work. All that is a big financial burden that not only just is something they're required to do, but if they don't do it, they go to jail. Yeah. And now they've lost their job. They have all these expenses that are coming, not just with their day-to-day life expenses. These are attached to a criminal 11-month and 29-day sentence hanging over their head. But talk about the added stress when not only can you not pay your bills, but you're going to miss the payment to the probation office, which could mean you go to jail and can't provide for your family. So yeah, you can see that the average person is getting stressed, but somebody who's on probation in the criminal justice system has got at that time, it's that much amped up. It's that much greater for them, because it's not that they're going to get a lawsuit in the mail, or maybe they'll get a letter from the landlord. They will have police officers showing up at their door to take them away for a warrant. And right now you've got no money. And the only way you can get out of jail is post a bond that costs money. Mm-hmm. So it becomes it piles on.
Yeah. Most people that aren't in that situation don't realize how unfair it is to those in different economic demographics. They really don't, because as you were just saying, those fines, they get a ticket, they got to pay for it. They get a DUI, they got to pay for it. They get a small charge, they've got to pay for it. And you say, well, we're all paying the same, but that's not really true. Because if you make $100,000 a year, we're not paying the same a portion of our paycheck. Someone who is living in poverty, many times it breaks them, and having those big fines and having those things actually causes them to commit more crimes because they're in survival. And I hope that, the whole idea on tough on crime back in the day, I think it was well intended. I think that people are, they thought, well, we got to be tough on crime and it's going to make everybody safer. But it's really had the opposite effect. It's really, it hasn't made everybody safer. It's made everybody really in more danger, because we're having problems economically. We're having problems right now. Crime has doubled in the last, rather, the murder rate has doubled in the last compared to last year, over the last couple of months. We're having all of these issues, and it really doesn't help the situation at all.
No. And when you talk about the problem being an increase in murder rate, that's where the attention needs to be. And that's where the focus needs to be from our police departments and our district attorney's office on violent crimes, not imposing fines, probation, lawyer fees on people, for example, who are charged with possessing a plant that makes them feel good, doesn't harm anybody. So you see that some of the smaller types of cases, nonviolent offenses, those cases are the ones that have the same impact, but they're not protecting the community, in my opinion. And then that's kind of maybe the difference.
Victimless crimes. They're victimless crimes. Like, I don't think you should be doing that, even though you're not hurting anybody. I don't think you should be doing that. So I'm going to put you in handcuffs and lock you in a cage until you do exactly what I want you to do. And then I'm going to follow you for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and have you come in every single month. And I'm going to test you to make sure you're not doing what I don't want you to do.
You should.
And if you test positive and you're doing what I don't want you to do, I'm going to put you back in a cage. Where's the logic in that at this point?
You just nailed it. And that's not something that's consistent, not even across the country. We know. I took the snapshot yesterday. I was watching TV here in my office of all the states that are now green in some form or fashion. It's not even across the country. We're just deciding in a specific state based on invisible boundaries that you in this state can't do it, but it's you go across the river, it's okay. We're not going to put you in jail. And then even more so within the states, right, you have different counties that enforce it differently. And so, yeah, it's unfair on multiple levels. And then on top of that we didn't finish, if you're on probation, you can't pay your way out. We're just going to keep you on probation, or we're going to put you in jail. But at worst, we're just going to keep you on the chain and keep you in the system. So if God forbid you do something else, now you've got it compounded even worse. We're not going to let you out of our grasp. And yeah, it's unfair on multiple levels, and people suffer from it.
Yeah. What are the probation fees right now? If you go in every month, what do you have to pay?
Between $40 and $50.
So, $40 and $50. Let's just say it's $50. Yes. $600 a year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, that's not that big of a deal, but to someone in poverty, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, no, you see it all the time. I mean, you made a good point, Ed, that, if you came in and I represented you on a marijuana charge, right, you'd have to hire me and pay me anywhere between $1,000 and a few $1,000s. And we go to court and they'd say your fines are X, and you'd go down to the clerk's office and you write a check, and sometimes they actually reward you for paying it up front. They put you on unsupervised probation. So they're actually rewarding people who have money on top of it, because if you pay your fines and costs in some counties, they won't even supervise you. But if you can't, then we're going to supervise you and make you pay the $40 a month, keep you on our list, and then we'll test you and probably cause you more problems. So that's another layer of having the benefit of just writing the check for $1,000 and going about your way. Some people don't get to do that. And that doesn't even count the people who maybe put it on the wrong day for their calendar, have a family emergency, can't make it to their court. Even with the citation, you have to present yourself at court at some point. And missing that court date, you've got warrants that go up for your arrest. You have additional court costs and fines that go along with missing your court date. So, I mean, it can compound a lot in people who are in maybe a disadvantaged situation, whether it's financially, mentally, family, medical situations, health-wise, that find themselves in that situation, aren't going to have the ability to get themselves out as easily as you or I.
That's very true. And, some people call it white privilege. I don't know if it's that, could be, but for sure it's economically privileged, because
green privilege.
We're not having to deal with that. I mean, are we seeing these things kind of loosen up as the society is getting a little more progressive?
Green privilege is maybe the way to say it. I don't see it personally. I've seen a few things that have changed. You're starting to see now in Tennessee this idea of minor violations of probation being treated differently than if you went out and committed a new crime. You see and you're seeing some of the sentencing maybe changing a little bit, where even Governor Lee has kind of been vocal about trying to change some of the sentencing practices we have. And then, and marijuana is a big thing that I handle a lot of marijuana cases. And you've seen, for example, Glenn Funk here in Davidson County loosen up as far as his prosecution of minor marijuana cases. So you're seeing some of it, but I would say in general, no, there's no let up. I think the only thing I've seen in the past year is you've seen a reduction in people out in the community. You've seen maybe a reduction in overall arrests, because I don't think people are out doing as much and aren't being policed as much. There's just a different activity level in 2020 than there was in years prior. But as far as their enforcement of crimes in a general sense, no, I don't see that. I don't see the fines and fees becoming less. In fact, oftentimes they don't ever take fines and fees out. They always add them in, right? There's every year or two, there's a new line item with a new fee for the state, a new drug testing fee. I mean, you may have never gotten drug tested, never had your blood taken, but if you have a drug or alcohol offense, you have a fee of $150 for a drug and alcohol testing fee. You didn't get tested. You're paying for everybody else's drug test. So there's a lot of stuff that go on that list. Even for a 1 gram of marijuana, right? Even for the smallest little case, it has $1,000 worth of court costs.
Wow.
Because it's characterized as a drug and alcohol offense.
The Nashville Scene just did an interview with Police Chief Drake. He got into the marijuana laws a little bit, talking about how the DA's office isn't prosecuting those offenses. Kind of talk about what he said specifically, though, about it, and what you thought about it.
Sure. Yeah. So just give some context. Glenn Funk is our district attorney here in Davidson County. We're a metropolitan area. And he made the decision, and I'm very supportive of his decision, that his office was no longer going to waste resources prosecuting minor possession of marijuana cases. In Tennessee, we call it simple possession, which means you've got less than 14.175 grams, or less than a half ounce of marijuana in Tennessee is considered a misdemeanor. And so those type of offenses, after Glenn Funk made that decision, in essence, kind of went away. We stopped seeing people getting cited for it. We started seeing the 1 or 2 gram of marijuana cases. We still have our bigger cases where those people come in and they have large amounts, pounds of marijuana. They're still prosecuting those, but any of your minor cases went away. And so the previous police chief, I believe his name was Steve Anderson, I don't believe pushed back. They weren't fighting. I don't think him and Glenn Funk got along, but he ultimately, whether it was discretion from the officers or just his instruction, I don't know, they stopped policing it as well. People stopped getting the citations. And so because of that, when Police Chief Drake took over, one of the questions that was posed to him was, General Funk has, in essence, stopped prosecuting people for this type of offense. What is your position? Do you support that policy? And his response was very unusual, because the response was kind of the company line of, well, the state laws still exist. It's still illegal in the state of Tennessee to possess any amount of marijuana. So cannabis with over 0.3% THC is illegal still in the state of Tennessee. And we have to enforce the laws, and we're going to continue to do that. He also went on to say that, and kind of this link between the reason we're going to do that is because we're finding a lot of people that are victims of violent crimes, their apartments and their residences smell like marijuana, which I thought was pretty unusual. And then he kind of followed up by saying, small offenses lead to bigger crimes. So if we police these, I took it to mean if we police the smaller offenses, then it'll lead us to be able to police bigger crimes, lead us to, for example, if we search the car because of the smell of marijuana, we find the gun, or if we stop a bad actor, or if we find a fugitive on the loose, things like that they could lead to bigger offenses. So his answer was really unusual in that regard, as the reasons why he wants to continue to enforce them. But what I believe, that's something he almost has to say. He has to say that he has to enforce the laws of the state of Tennessee. He has to point that out. He can't come out as the police chief and say, I'm not going to enforce the laws of the state of Tennessee. What was confusing to me is the reason he gave. what was refreshing is at the end of the interview, the national scene reporter made a comment that said, well, after our interview, or towards the end of the interview, he did come back and gave I think he said, strong indication that his police officers would utilize discretion, and they would use discretion. And that he said that, his example he gave was, if we find somebody that has a marijuana joint, I would imagine that there's officers that are going to use discretion and allow that person to go free. And so that's kind of the opposite of saying that we're going to enforce the state laws as written. So he's kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth, but that's refreshing to hear, because I think that's what's been going on now, is that they've been using discretion and they've not been citing people or arresting people for minor offenses. And it's been nice. It's been a welcome change to Metro Davidson County, where they used to have literally an entire docket that was dedicated. They call it the one-stop docket for all the citations, and I bet half of them were minor drug offenses. They've gotten rid of that whole docket.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I mean, the system was set up for a long time, just to do that. I mean, you figure out how much they were making off that. So thankfully, not anymore. But a police chief does in a way have to toe the line. So I kind of understand. He's got to say is they have to enforce the laws. But the officers, since the last chief, they have been practicing discretion since then, correct?
Yeah, they have, and I'm assuming. Oh, I can know that's what they've been doing, is when they pull somebody over and they find them to have a small amount of marijuana, they've been taking it, throwing it away, and sending them on their way, and that's the essence of discretion. What I found was weird is at the end of the interview, he kind of said that the officer was doing. He said, "This may have happened. I'm not sure," implying that he doesn't have any knowledge or doesn't know if his officers are doing that, which I found to be very unusual, because there's no way he would not know that that's happening. Those used to be a very regular citation and offense that people would get charged with every day, and now they're non-existent. He would have to know that's happening. Yeah, and I would assume he would.
I think it's so political for some. I mean, he's a human being. He's got his views. He's probably, who knows? He could have family members that are absolutely against it. He could have friends. He could have political allies. And he's covering or he could really believe it too. But he's covering his bases. I was talking to another friend who was a politician, and he didn't want to come out and say that he was supportive of legalization when I know that he's supportive of legalization. And you think about how politicians, and I don't know, is a police chief's a politician, right? I mean, that's he's worked
an elected official.
Yeah, he's worked his way up to that position. I know he's worked really hard over the years, but he is in a political position. And, I think also with what you're seeing in society right now, where people are purposely misrepresenting and misunderstanding what you're saying. They don't want to really take what you said for what you said. They want to twist it into meaning what they want it to mean to make you wrong or bad. And so I think that we could be seeing, that as well.
And that's a great point, because that's kind of what I felt, is that he felt one way, but he kind of had to say the other thing. And it's almost like something you read out of a 70s police chief manual of, it causes people to get robbed and raped. And it's a drug that it just seemed like something that you would read out of an old manual, or that he's kind of toting the line. But I guess the opposite is if he did come out and say, yeah, we're not going to arrest people for that. Well, that's not probably what he should be saying either. And that would get, as you pointed out, taken new police chief Drake legalizes marijuana in Davidson County, right. Something like that. And so he's probably got to be pretty careful about how he does that. But also, there's also some underlying stuff here too. One of the best ways that police officers get inside your house, get inside your car, get inside your personal stuff is with the smell or the odor of cannabis. Now, they say the odor of marijuana, but it's the odor of cannabis, because they don't know what the THC level is. And so if they were to come out and say, we're no longer going to cite people for marijuana, well, then I would argue, if I was the lawyer on the other side, well, then you don't have the right then, if you're not going to arrest somebody and you've already made those intentions clear, you don't get to utilize that smell as probable cause to search the vehicle now if you're not going to pursue a criminal action against them. So it may be something that they're wanting to preserve, their ability to kind of pursue it in an attempt to get a bigger crime or find something more or justify a search.
It
So
was interesting. So the Supreme Court Justice Gurish, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, but just last week I was reading an article about him saying that he didn't really believe that he's basically saying everything's a felony now. He said this, like, basically everybody on the in the United States at some point, some law people are saying that they've committed a felony with or without knowing it. And that he wanted to really bring back the true intention of the Fourth Amendment. And that would mean that police can't follow someone in the house if they're believed to have committed a felony or in the act of a felony, as long as it's not violent. So that would kind of go a little bit to what you're talking about.
yeah, yeah, and the Fourth Amendment's been so eroded. You've got a rule, and then you've got exceptions to the rule, and the exceptions have eaten up the rule. And you're seeing that a lot. I mean, rarely do we see any new cases come out in the Court of Appeals or the Sixth Circuit or our Supreme Court that add more protection. It's always limiting the protection. It's always going the other way. And so, yeah, that's really refreshing hearing somebody as high up as Gorsuch. I think it's Gorsuch, or I think I probably said it wrong too, making a comment like that, because that's where, that's where the judiciary takes their lead from when they're saying stuff like that. That's something that could potentially help a lot. And there was a recent case came out this week in Tennessee, the Supreme Court in Tennessee, that Ben Rabin argued that also added some more protection. It was a very unusual case because they came and upheld the Fourth Amendment and found that the search was not lawful, and it was kind of strengthening it up. It was a good case for citizens of the state.
Well, and that's one of the things, as you were saying, like, we go further and further away. I mean, the Fourth Amendment has definitely been eroded. When the Patriot Act came out, you had all the Americans saying, "Yay, Patriot Act!" And if you're against this, you're not patriotic. It's like the opposite of patriot. But if you read it, it should have been called the Act to Repeal the Fourth Amendment. You have it sets up these FISA courts that don't have to follow the same rules. It sets up this dragnet security. They don't have to get a search warrant to listen to your phone calls or to go into your emails. It sets up, Edward Snowden goes in and releases this information, but and says, "Hey, this is what we're doing. We should know about it. The citizens should know about it." And they're like, "Oh, well, it's a FISA court. It's a bill that Congress passed." And we're slowly, just eroding our rights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I love that too, because anytime you hear the name of an act being something like that, just understand it's probably the opposite of that. It's there's some other motive behind it. The "Do you love babies and children" act. It's like, if you don't support that, So yeah, we've seen that, and the Patriot Act was a great example, because I believe it was previously presented to Congress and shot down prior to 9/11, and it had some different name to it, and then they repackaged it and presented it after 9/11, and it went through, and that's it is. And I think that you've got the erosion of that. And I think with technology, you're going to see that it's not so much in our face anymore. It's happening behind closed doors with computer systems and information being pulled out in a lot of different ways. So,
when you think about like what's happening right now too with the First Amendment, and there's debates whether somebody like Twitter can censor the president or whoever, really. And I look at the ACLU, which is an organization that I thought has done a lot of good things over the years. And even the ACLU, they were protecting like the KKK back in the day. And they're like, we don't agree with anything that they're doing, but we've got to protect free speech, because if we don't protect their free speech, we're not going to have our free speech protected, or somebody else's free speech protected. And then while all this was going on during the last 4 years of the Trump administration, especially the last 18 months, where the censorship was really starting to build, they were silent, basically. And I feel like we're forgetting the importance of defending the First Amendment, defending our Bill of Rights, to the point that if it's just not popular, the mob is going to come get us if we don't. But before we know it, we're not going to have a First Amendment or a Fourth Amendment.
Yeah. You saw a lot of that when Trump got censored or got shut out of Twitter and some of the platforms, people jumping out saying, First Amendment, things like that. But that's generally only when the government gets involved. And that creates a whole nother issue of whether Facebook and Twitter, they become, in essence, governmental entities, kind of like a utility company would be. So, you're going to have some more that come down the pipeline, because generally only the government can infringe upon your constitutional rights in general. And so, yeah, and I think those private organizations like that are going to, I think they'll have to ultimately make some big decisions on how they want to do that, because, of course, I support any private company from making decisions on how they want to run their company. That doesn't affect me. But when they start making decisions in the capacity that they're in, they are a utility almost.
They are the news distributors. We're not supposed to censor the press. And, there's no way the founders could have seen what's, going on today when they were writing everything. And, they have ultimate power to, cut off a sitting president or to stifle dissent. And so we definitely need to relook it. But I think that, if a company is operating as a news aggregate, basically, in a way, and they're sending out news and stories, I think you got to be really careful. It's a slippery slope. And I always err on the side of freedom, even if it's unpopular freedom, because if we don't protect that freedom, it's going to go away really quickly.
Yeah. We've got a few cases right now in our law firm that involve anti-SLAPP litigation. Have you ever heard of that? Anti-SLAPP, SLAPP. It is in essence, it's when people sue other people for defamation. You see this often with social media posts, or you'll see somebody leave a bad review, and they want to file lawsuits to try to either keep them to remove the post, or to show that they're being defamatory. We have legislation in our state and laws in our state that prevent people from doing that. And if you cannot show a pretty heavy burden when you file that action, the person who files the lawsuit against the person who posted it has to pay the attorney's fees, cost. You have a pretty heavy hand. So you have to be careful before you try to stop somebody from posting or speaking out in public about you. There's some protection there, but that obviously wouldn't apply the same to Twitter and Facebook and different companies like that, because in essence, they're deciding they don't want to release it. They're not trying to go attack them for doing it. So you maybe got some different stuff there, but yeah, I mean, we see that not just with big entities, we see that with individuals a lot that say, you can't say that about me. Well, now with the news media, people who used to not have any outlet can post and have, average Joe maybe have 2,500, 5,000 followers, or, a lot more sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things we got to be careful of, because it's getting to be as, if someone has a different view, let's censor them. If the mob jumps on, let's censor them. What just happened to Gina Carano, taking completely out of context what she said. I didn't even agree with what she said, but she wasn't doing what they said she was doing. They just brought the mob out against her and destroyed her name, calling her anti-Semitic and all these horrible things, when she's the opposite of that. She's a very loving person. She's a great person. She was just saying, hey, we've got to really watch the erosion of our freedoms. This is what happened to the Jews in Germany. Not saying that I'm not comparing Republicans to this. Didn't even say anything about that. And then all of a sudden, the mob comes out and says that she's saying horrible things, and George Lucas Films comes out and basically their statement was completely different than what she said. But because that's the headline, they automatically thinks that's what she's doing.
Yeah, it's really scary, because, and it's not even going to things that people are saying in present day, in present time. You're being judged sometimes on things you say and do on today's standards and where we are today, but it happened 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Or it happened 11 years ago, something you said and did when our culture, times are different now. People are more sensitive, I believe, in understanding how things they say can be offensive. I'm not sure that that's where we were 15 years ago.
No.
I'm not sure that people were as careful about what they dressed up like or for Halloween or what they said or, maybe some of the comments, some of the words they use that now are no longer acceptable words. I mean, we've seen that over the years we've had football teams that have been renamed and nobody thought that, right. We've got some words that change meaning as time passes. And I'm fearful that some people have been going back and digging up old stuff to try to cancel them or harm them. And the worst thing is the industries and the companies are jumping on board and saying, yep, we're gonna fire them, or we're gonna cancel them, or we're gonna try to smear their name or remove them from our product without any due diligence at all. And it's scary. That's something that everybody in any demographic could be subject to.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting? Just let's say we're in 2021, 15 years ago. Obama's stump speech said he did not support gay marriage. Hillary Clinton used to run it. I believe marriage is between a man and a woman. Now, if someone were to say that, they'd be canceled, but they don't go back and cancel Obama. They don't go back and cancel Hillary Clinton. There's a lot of things 15 years ago, things were a lot different. Again, that was politicians saying probably like what Chief Drake is saying right now, like, he's got to hit that status quo line where, we're going to enforce the laws of Tennessee, knowing that really society is going in a different direction in 5 years. That's kind of the wrong side of history.
Yeah. Right. And that's exactly right. Is that I think that it changes so quickly and it's so fluid. And some people, I mean, you think of some of the older people, you've heard of this, these people that haven't caught up. They haven't been informed of what you're supposed to do now. And they don't appreciate how serious what they say and do is. And then all of a sudden they're canceled and they're going, how'd that happen? Or they owned a sports team and they have to sell it or whatever. And maybe there's some of that is just vetting out people that are racist and bad people. But it like you've said before, it's a slippery slope when it doesn't take much other than an accusation on the town square with the pitchfork before they're marking people with the letter and they're sending them off to the dungeon. I mean,
that's it. I mean, like it's Salem witch trials in many ways, what we're seeing. I mean, the power of the mob, we have laws in place to protect people against the mob. Mobs have been formed throughout history and caused major problems. That's why we have laws. And, I don't think anybody could have seen the future to the point that we're at right now, to where everything is so sensitive. Information spreads instantaneously. It's shared on social media. It goes viral. Headlines are read instead of actual articles or what you say. And, as we're looking into the future, then you're going to have the deep fakes, which is coming. You're going to have you or I will be talking supposedly, and it's not us. And then the mob jumps on that as well. So we're going to have to really start looking at, I think we're going to need to look at like giving people grace for what they did 10 or 15 years ago, or what they said 10 or 15 years ago. And we're going to have to acknowledge that the mob mentality is actually, dangerous to everyone's freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes them to stand up and say, no, we're not going to continue this problem. We're not going to continue this trend of firing, canceling, shaming in public for things people whose conduct, 10, 20 years ago. I agree. And it's going to take some changing of the mindset of not only individuals, but also of these businesses that are so worried about their image and the shareholders. I mean, that's what I think a lot of times you have that is that we can't even risk it. So even if somebody is accusing you of it, not even if it's true or not, but the accusation's enough for us to jump ship. And I don't know when that changed. Usually if you have somebody who works for your company or works for your star, your TV show, and that comes out, you'd hope they would stand up and say, no, I know that person. He's not a racist. I know he said that 12 years ago, but I know them and they're a good person. Instead, people aren't willing to do that. They just jump back up and cut them loose and figure that's the safer bet and safer route to go, which is, I don't like that.
Yeah. Well, it's, a lot of it's like the idea that someone could be like a keyboard warrior. They go out there and they just share and then they comment and then, more people get involved, and you got the virtue signalers that love to look good on their Instagram page online, doing the right thing and fighting for social justice. I mean, I'm all for fighting for social justice. I've been involved in a lot of those things for the last 16 years or so. But we're actually trying to make change, trying to change laws, trying to do the right thing, trying to get police to wear cameras, trying to get marijuana legal, those type of things, that trying to fix the mandatory minimum sentencing, all those things that we know that we should fix because it's wrong. But what we're seeing now is more the virtue signaling of, I want to look cool. I want to make you wrong. Well, it's like, go change some policy. Go help us change some policy.
Well, that takes work, Ed, because you've been doing it. It takes a lot of work, a lot of effort. It's really easy to sit behind your keyboard and shoot a DM or an email to somebody's boss and say, hey, I saw they commented here on this picture 4 years ago, and I think they're racist, and you need to fire them. It's really, everybody has a voice. Everybody has access. You go on people's website, you can find out who the person is, go to their LinkedIn, you can instant message them. You have access. You didn't always have access to everybody's boss or everybody's producer or everybody, you didn't have the ability to just voice that out to the world. Now everybody's got that voice, and people like that are using it I think the wrong way, and it's not good for our society at all.
Now, these are complicated problems because I don't know exactly how we end up fixing it, but I mean, it's something that we both see as a problem. A lot of people see as a problem. I think publicly, the politicians in many ways don't want to talk about it because they don't want to have the mob come after them for saying, oh, you didn't say the right thing about this, or you didn't say the right thing about that. And, but I think these open conversations are really what's needed. And if the mob comes after, it's kind of a double-edged sword though. It's because if the mob comes, then you got to deal with the mob too. And the mob is crazy. And if you don't have time to deal with the mob, then it becomes even more complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, time and money. I mean, you've got to a lot of times have the resources to fight back. And, that's definitely a problem. And you're right. I don't know the solution other than doing my part to make sure that I don't fall into that same trap of believing what I read in the headlines, believing somebody on their, judging somebody at their worst, or judging somebody when they make a mistake. That's not how I judge people. And that's not how I view people. And I also don't run a multinational corporation that has, different obligations, but that's just I'm not going to do it here at my business and my law firms. And maybe other people, can take some personal responsibility and step up and try to help defend people and overlook some things when people make mistakes. I mean, we do it all the time. I mean, most people call my office at their worst. I mean, nobody's calling me with great news. Nobody's calling to hire me. They usually are calling me because they've done something wrong, or they've got themselves in a tough situation. Every once in a while, been wrongfully accused of something, but got themselves in a tough situation. And so I'm oftentimes viewing people after they've made a mistake or done something they're not proud of. And I think a lot of people don't. They think, it's this feeling of everybody should do the right thing all the time. And if you don't, then I'm going to jump on my pedestal and tell you how wrong I am. And that's going to make me feel better. And,
it's weird, weird times. You were talking earlier about the marijuana laws, state by state, but more specifically, county by county. Talk about how somebody could, do one thing in one county, but just the county over another thing and end up in prison.
Yeah. We got off a little bit on social justice stuff, which I enjoy, and I know you're passionate about, and a lot about that stuff. But it's really unusual. So Tennessee's got some pretty strict laws when it comes to cannabis and marijuana. And even though we've got really, really good and supporting laws as it relates to hemp. So weirdly enough, we are on the forefront of really good hemp legislation, and we are at the very end of the line as it relates to marijuana legislation. So, and then in Tennessee, the whole state operates under state law. So nobody in different counties, that's the same law across the state. There are some different cities that have municipal ordinances, speeding, different things around your town that you could have that maybe different in different counties, but they can't run afoul to the state law. So the state law controls, but you have some counties like Davidson Metro that don't enforce minor possession of marijuana cases, haven't for a while. Even if they were to charge you with it, the result of the case is pretty minor. A lot of times they're being dismissed on court cost. no probation, no drug testing, things like that. But you don't have to drive. I live in Williamson County. I practice in Davidson County mostly, as my office is. You don't have to drive 10 minutes south on Interstate 65. If you got pulled over in Williamson County, they're going to charge you with simple possession. They may arrest you, depending. They're supposed to cite you, but some officers don't choose to follow the rules and they arrest you. Have to hire an attorney, be charged with a crime, looking at 11 months and 29 days in jail, potentially, most likely probation. And you can almost, you're a street over from Davidson County where they would just let you go. So, and then you go to some counties in rural Tennessee where they're charging people with felonies. Murfreesboro actually does this sometimes with felonies when they have 15 grams, right? So you're right over the break, which is supposed to mean that you possess there's a couple different ways you can reach a felony. It can be possessed with the intent to sell, or you can be charged with possessing and actually selling it. They catch you in the act. And so if it's a possession case where you're not actually selling it, delivering it, or committing one of the 4 offenses that make it a felony, it's based on the weight. But it's just a presumption. So they still have to prove that even if it's 15 grams, that you possessed it with the intent to sell it. 15 grams is not going to do that. If you had 50 pounds, that may be one that the presumption could be met. But some of these officers are really aggressive where they found somebody with 15, 17, 20 grams. They're not just charging them with a misdemeanor. They're actually charging them with a felony. So you're looking at 1 to 2 years in prison. And
So we're still seeing that in the state of Tennessee where someone could have a small amount being charged with a felony?
I just got hired on a case a couple of weeks ago. Absolutely. You're seeing that all over the state. Places like maybe in Memphis, Nashville, they have kind of moved away from that, which is the bigger areas. And we talked about it earlier with General Funk kind of not prosecuting that, which caused that discretion to take place. But you don't have to go far in these rural areas. And not only are they still charging people with felonies, they are still demanding jail time for these offenses. So you're having people that have an ounce of weed, an ounce of marijuana, driving back to their house. They get pulled over. They're facing a felony charge. And even worse is if you have a protective firearm and you possess a felony amount of marijuana, now you've got a really serious charge, which is a felony possession of a firearm. And that has mandatory jail time. Mandatory. You're going to jail if you're convicted of that offense. And sometimes that felony misdemeanor designation is what causes that. So you have an officer in their discretion that says, okay, I'm going to charge them with the felony. And because they have a gun, now they got another felony. So it kicks that in.
Why do the judges and officers really believe this? Because I guess I'm not around people that believe marijuana should be legal and people should go to prison for it. I don't even know, I haven't had a conversation with somebody like that in a long time, other than somebody really old. And then, they're just in a different era, but do these cops and stuff really believe this in these counties?
I believe the cops don't, because I generally believe they're going to be younger. I feel like they're just kind of doing the job, and I've even had them say, I wish they just legalize it because it'd make my job a lot easier type thing. But you have judges that I've sat in court in 2020 and listened, maybe not sat in court, but maybe in 2019, because we weren't in court much in 2020, and listened to a judge who reads an essay and he makes people write an essay about the marijuana cartels from Mexico that are decapitating people, and that the marijuana they're smoking in Gallatin, Tennessee is the result of this cartel activity. And basically when you buy drugs in Sumner County, you're funding the cartel in Mexico. I'm not kidding. This is still being said by judges that are elected in our state right now, currently. And I've even had judges that will talk about it being, as bad as anything. Marijuana is as bad as any drug because people think it's okay. So because of that, it's worse than the other ones. So you're seeing this still to this day. And usually they are older. I would say your younger judges are not of that mindset. I would say that generally they're the older, more conservative judges, obviously. But yeah, they're saying that, and it's a real thing. And people who violate probation because they failed drug tests are getting put in jail for a long period of time. So when people talk about, the DA may say this, we're not putting people in jail for small amounts of marijuana. Maybe you're not. You're putting them on probation. And when they violate because they want to continue to consume cannabis, now they go to jail for a year, or now they go to jail for the 6 months. So that's really what the impact is that, and we talked about this, I think the last time, getting them in the system is what causes the ultimate problem, because it doesn't take much once they do to cause them to go to jail or cause the sentence to come down on them.
Yeah, there's such a disconnection with that idea, and I think where we're at, in society. The idea that people would still be going to prison for marijuana is it's insane, because you're right. Yeah, in certain states, not illegal at all. But then you go to a state like Tennessee, decriminalized in specific counties, but you go one street over and you can catch a felony.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, you go 1 or 2 blocks over off Old Hickory Boulevard in South Davidson County and venture into Williamson County, you can face a felony charge, which with across the street, the officer would just throw it away and send you on your way. So yeah, it's very troubling, and it needs to change. And I've been advocating for its change for a long time, but it absolutely needs to change. And I talk about being on the right side of history. This is the example I always tell the DAs when I'm talking to them. Say, you were going to laugh. In 10 years, you're going to laugh. We're going to talk about that you still were wanting to prosecute this when the whole country is legalized, and you're kind of looking back going, yeah, but I had to do my job. I'm going to remind you of that, okay? You want to be on the right side of history. You want to let this guy have a break, or do you want to be another hammer trying to pound a nail,
Yeah. And you also got to think about, you work in, in the system. The DAs work in the system, and so it's normal for you to see this every single day. Most people don't. So, it's like it does seem extreme for a violation that doesn't hurt anybody to lock somebody in a cage and tell them what they can and can't do with their life. It just blows my mind.
Yeah, and we get kind of numb to it. I mean, you see it all the time, and I roll out the word 1129 probation, which is 11 months and 29 days, which is 1 day short of a year of probation, and as if it's just running to the grocery store. I use words like I need to file a motion to get somebody out of jail. I'm using the word jail and bond and prison all the time. But you're right, the average person doesn't. I mean, that scares them to death, and the thought of them consuming something that helps them in their life, that doesn't hurt anybody else, and having to jump into that system is it's scary. And you're right. I get somewhat numb to it. It becomes part of the job, when if I step back sometimes and go, I can't believe they were even trying to do that. I can't believe they even wanted to put the guy in prison.
Right.
I do get a little numb to it. And then when you're sitting in court and hear the judges that lose their mind when they find out somebody in a custody case smokes marijuana and takes their kids away from them. And that's happening too. I mean, we don't talk about that much because that's more of the family law setting, but you've got judges in this state that look at it as being if you consume marijuana, I'm taking your kids away from you. I'm putting you in a drug treatment program. And I want to see 7 months or 6 months of past drug screens before I'm going to let you see your kid. If you've ever consumed cannabis and been around your kids, I'm the way better father consuming cannabis around my kids than I would be otherwise. And I think a lot of people find the same way, is that I'm not using alcohol. I'm not going and using prescription drugs to help me sleep at night. I wait for my kids to go down. I smoke a joint. I watch TV for 30 minutes and I sleep like a baby. But you're telling me because of that, I can't be around my kids? That's right. The most ludicrous thing ever. So I think that gets a little bit hidden sometimes, because that's another application of living and being in the court system in a state that doesn't condone consuming cannabis in any way, doesn't. And even you're seeing this with the CBD and some of the full spectrum hemp products. They're causing people to test positive, and they're having to fight their way out of, whether it's an unemployment situation or being fired or having their kids taken away because they're failing because they're using a legal product.
Yeah, it's a weird thing where people try to force you into doing what they think is right. I'm going to force you into doing what my opinion is right. And if you don't do it, we're going to lock you in a cage. We're going to come take away your freedom because I have that much power over you. And I want to assert that power and show you that I'm all powerful as a, whatever it is, judge, as a prosecutor. And it's really, that's one of the reasons we got to get good human beings in there. It's really a character flaw. Any judge that's, doing that at this point is, I understand a lot of them are older, but it's a character flaw from society back 20 years ago. The guy might be a good person and really believe this stuff, but it was, we can now see how wrong it was. We can now see the manipulation in the old Reefer Madness videos. We can now see through freedom of information what the real motive behind this was, and it was to hurt the African American communities. We now see that, and so it's like, maybe they don't know the history, or maybe they've been enslaving people in jails for so long they can't even acknowledge that they're really part of the problem.
A combination of all three of those. I mean, I think you nailed it, because if you go back to what originally caused these laws to be in place and caused people to believe that they could enforce their will on consuming marijuana, for example, on other people, if you go back to the cause, it was not derived from something wholesome. It wasn't done to better society. It was in fact done to harm people and harm a group of people. But it goes back to this idea that once you do something for so long, and I joke about this with our office, we have some systems in our office that all of a sudden you just haven't looked at for a while, and you kind of look up and go, why are we doing like that? Because that's the way we've always done it.
Yes.
And you go, well, maybe we should rethink it, because that doesn't make sense on a number of levels. And I think that because of this, the government's involved, and because of the people that were behind the initially behind it, and then ultimately in the 70s with Nixon and that administration that passed what they did was so profound that it's going to take generations to unravel that. Whereas, my office, I can walk in and change the system tomorrow and start doing something different. I feel like it's just going to take this unraveling, because you have judges that aren't willing to step back and do what's right, maybe, or legislators step back to do what's right. It's easier to just follow the status quo. It's easier to just keep doing the same thing. And it's safe, right? Because if you're going to step out as a politician and make change, you have to subject yourself to that change not being well received by some people. And, with the politician, they've got to get votes to get in power, and there's some of that involved. So yeah, I agree 100%.
Well, you think about the system, like anytime there's the war on drugs, there's a war on cancer, then you're going to the Iraq war. And it seems like whenever we declare war on something, it's a war that never ends, because you have this big economic machine that's built off of this war. And if you stop the war, somebody's losing money. Like, that's really what it comes down to. You stop the war on drugs, there's going to be a lot of money, a lot of people that are making this money in power, having the ultimate power of imprisoning people or getting what they want from these organizations that are part of this system, getting the money. That all goes away. So you really have a system built on war, which war is never good. War's never good. We're so quick to say, war on drugs, war on cancer, war. And then you get the people that are like, yeah, we like war. We want war. And they don't even really know what they're saying. And it sounds good. A war on drugs kind of sounds good. If you hear it the first, I'm like, now at this point, I'm like, why do we want a war on this? Why do we want war? It's these words that are kind of plugged into our brain by whoever, society, by the government, by people. And just like the Patriot Act sounds good. But, when you really look at what's behind it, I don't want any more war. The war, which war have we won on these things? Have we won the war on drugs? The war on cancer?
No.
How are we're not winning.
No. I faced this recently with our civil asset forfeiture stuff. We're trying to.
Oh, gosh.
And so we've got the federal government's been trying to make changes, but Tennessee legislature this past year, they were trying to explore making changes in the civil asset forfeiture. And you're literally asking the people whether it's working or not. Those are the same people that are keeping the money they take. Well, of course, those people don't want to change. They're taking money from people, not charging them with a crime, and then they get to keep them in their coffers and buy their new toys and pay for their friends to come and work with them. Imagine telling a group of police officers whose job is not to go patrol speed traps and to go into the inner city. They're sitting on the interstate in a nice SUV and getting to target and profile people. And then if they find them, they make up some reason, or they smell marijuana, they search the car, and they take their money from them. If they win and they get to keep it, and they get new stuff, it goes in their bank account. Not their personal bank account, but that of the agency.
Sure.
So it's and so of course those people don't want change. They're the ones directly benefiting from that ridiculous law.
Well, the civil asset forfeiture, that's a whole another crazy subject. I don't
That's
think
a whole podcast.
Yeah, I almost have like smoke coming out of my ears when you say that, because it's so wrong. I don't think most people even know it exists. You would have to like really be kind of watching and understanding the real problems in society to know that this exists. But the idea that I can be carrying $2,000 cash on me going through certain counties in Tennessee, and if they pull me over and decide whether legally or illegally they can search my car and find a couple $1,000, they can take that money. And it's up to me to prove where I got the money. And that process can take months or even years. And this has happened over and over, where good people not violating any crimes, not doing anything wrong, were arrested simply because they had cash, going to buy a car, going to buy a truck, going to buy furniture. It's happened over and over and over again. And there's politicians out there. The majority of politicians are allowing this in the state of Tennessee right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of changes that need to be made. First of all, if you're not going to get rid of the whole process, then there needs to be change where the money doesn't go to the individual organizations. I mean, that is one of the fundamental problems, is the people that are actually deciding whether or not to take that person's money are the ones who are receiving the money. And yeah, you've got situations that happen regularly where somebody has their $3,000 taken because the car smells like cannabis and they assume it's something illegal. And not only is it on you to try to get it back, but you've got to hire a lawyer. You've got to pay, if you don't hire a lawyer, pay a $350 filing fee. And then to resolve the case, there are court costs that go into it and storage fees. So for $2,000, it doesn't make financial sense for you to fight for the $2,000. You're going to spend as much fighting for the money. So I don't know how many people, because I never get those cases where they get $2,000 taken and it's just not worth the fight. I've got a few cases right now. I've got a $100,000 case that we're representing a gentleman right now that was seized at the airport. We've got a $49,000 case at the airport. I've got a $10,000 case where a guy who's deaf, is hearing impaired, and he got $10,000 taken from him at the airport because the officers didn't like his explanation of where the money was, what the money was for. So we've got those cases regularly. We've got a case recently where the guy had, a couple ounces of marijuana. They took his car because it was a felony. With a felony amount of drugs, you're capable of just seizing the vehicle, even though it's not being seized under the criminal forfeiture statute. And you have been charged with a crime. They take it and it goes to a separate group of people that we've got to fight in administrative court to try to get that guy's car back. Well, guess how much the car's worth at? $1,500. It's like a 2002, old Suburban or something. And I told him, I said, if you didn't have the criminal case, which I'm going to help him with the asset forfeiture, you couldn't get an attorney to help you. Your vehicle's gone. But luckily he has a criminal case that I'm helping with. I'm going to do that as well. But yeah, you see, it's really bad. And even worse is you see it in specific areas. So it's not being enforced all across the state. You see it right in one part of Interstate 40. You see it in another part in Sumner County. You'll see it in Rutherford County, and then you'll see it at the airport.
Yeah. So
the airport.
At the airport, tell me about that. This is news to me. What's going on at the airport? Who's arresting people?
Yeah, that's where a lot of my cases are coming from right now. We're in Nashville, so Nashville's the main airport that people fly into. Really, all over Middle Tennessee. The next closest airport really is going to be, I guess, Memphis probably. So a lot of people fly into Nashville, and we have a lot of people that get their money seized at the airport, whether they're putting it in their carry-on bag and they go through security, they see a bunch of money and they pull them into the side room and question them. And if they don't like the answers they're getting, they seize it. We have people that, so you'll have the kind of the joint Metro task force. It involves a DEA agent. It involves a Metro officer and then airport security officer. You've got kind of a joint group of people that are doing it. And usually it stays at the state level. So they can take it two different ways. They can take it to the feds or they can take it to the state level. If it stays at the state level, they get 100% of the money. So that's an incentive for them to do it. And it's also easier for us to fight. It's locally here. It's just easier for us to handle the case because it's more local. If they take it to the DEA and the feds take the money, there's a profit sharing. So they split the money with the feds, but then it goes up to the federal courts, which is a lot bigger burden to fight in federal court than it is in state court. But we're fighting one out of Memphis in federal court right now. It was a hemp farmer that was in California, and they still operate in cash, and they had delivered their load of hemp in the Mississippi area, Memphis area, and had a courier they sent out to actually pick it up, a professional courier to come pick it up. And the people at the airport saw the courier with the money, flagged him, got him to the side and seized the money. We've provided everything we can provide as far as his licensing, his information as a hemp farmer, the invoices for the product, the receipt for the money, the courier invoice and contract, everything. And they still haven't given it back to us. So we're still fighting.
Wow. That's major power. I mean, you're just dealing with power. Like we're controlling, there's flexing on you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of times they're doing this, to be fair, a lot of it's based on investigation. They've already investigated this guy's flying in. They see his flight, they get his flight plans because they were following him. So a lot of these are just part of their police efforts. But another portion of those are just people that grow through security, or all of a sudden their money gets hit on by a dog. That's one of the ways they're trying to. And in our case, they keep saying that the money smelled like, illegal drugs. Well, all money smells like illegal. I mean, if you put enough money together, and on top of that, the dogs are trained to smell money. Right. So you don't get to talk to the dog afterward and say, "No, did you smell marijuana, or did you smell cocaine, or was it the money?" You just know that they hit. They don't hit differently. So those officers use that positive canine alert as a grounds to keep the money, to say it must have been around drugs. And
I was coming in one time from, I think it was Los Angeles, and as my bag's coming around, I could tell it, like the top of my bag was kind of wet, and it ended up being like the dog, sniffing it. It's like, what is this? It's like snot from the dog. And so I walk out, and there's a guy from like DEA, and I guess somebody from, then they stop me and say, "Hey, we like to check your bag. The dog smelled something." And it makes me think of that. They think they thought they had something, obviously. And the guy, I had enema catheters in there. So he's, "What is this?" I'm like, "It's an enema catheter." So I got stopped at the airport. And
I wonder what they smell. I wonder, did they ever find out what they smelled or what? I mean, who knows, I guess.
No, actually, so that I got rid of that bag afterwards, because I was coming back from Costa Rica before too, and a dog smelled something on the bag. And then I was with my mom and dad, and the guy pulls me aside, "Hey, you can tell me." And I was like, "No, I smoked weed yesterday, but I don't have anything on me." He's like, "Oh, okay, cool." And then they took and they searched all my stuff, et cetera. But that bag, there was something about that bag that that smelled. I don't know. But it was kind of funny. You just reminded me of that story at the Nashville airport. It was the funniest daggum thing, where they were like, "Oh, these are enema catheters." Sorry.
Yeah, no, I've had several cases where officers have misidentified drugs. I've had deodorant, a chunk of the deodorant that broken off, like the stick deodorant, and they found that, and they said it was crack cocaine. And my guy was like, I don't even know what crack looked like. I've never had crack.
Oh my God.
Because they don't have roadside tests. Good point. They actually are now rolling out these roadside tests for cannabis. So I've got a case right now recently where the officer said, "Yeah, I used my cell phone and did a test." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And they've got this little system where they can take the cannabis and they can, with their phone, it's like connecting their phone, and they run a test, and it pops up on their phone, and it keeps the GPS of where they are when they run the test. It basically gives a positive and negative is all it's doing. It's basically saying, is it high in CBD or high in THC? Wow. And the argument being that there's no, there's only 3 levels of cannabis. So there's no high THC and high CBD cannabis. So that's kind of what it's premised on. But I'm currently fighting that case right now, and I'm eager to get discovery to find out what the hell they're talking about with this test and how it's connected to their phone and how it says it's over 0.3%, because I don't believe there's any way to test that without actually doing some true lab testing to know what the cannabinoids are. So
yeah, I wouldn't know either. Where are we at right now with legalization? We talked probably 10 months ago. Have we made any progress with legalization in Tennessee?
No, actually, the headline yesterday in the paper was Cameron Sexton tables or shoots down the medical marijuana legislation. So no, not only are we making headway, just yesterday they slammed the door on it again for this session. So
wow,
I think they created a committee. This is kind of back to the, just doing what looks right. But I think they created a committee that's supposed to explore some of the issues, but I don't know what that's going to do.
Gosh, well.
So no headway
right
here.
Side of history here pretty soon because, well, I mean, the Biden administration might just legalize it if we're lucky, and we can stop this madness. Of course, that wouldn't fix all the problem, but it would fix a lot of it.
Absolutely.
Well, Joe, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. It's always fun to talk to you. If someone wants to get a hold of you, let's say for a marijuana case or anything like that, how would they do that?
Sure. Yeah, you can reach out to us on our phone, 615-298-7272, or you can go to betterknowjoe.com, and it's got my information. You can find me there, betterknowjoe.com.
Gosh, better know Joe. I know Joe. That's great.
There you go.
All right, Joe. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, thanks, man. Good to see you.
Thanks.